Welcome back and Happy New Year. This is episode number 25 of the Capital Press Club Legacy Podcast. I'm Dr. Colin Campbell, welcoming you back for our first episode of 2025. There is a lot to talk about, particularly in the area of media and journalism. But I wanted to start out like I normally do with this day in Black history, where you have several men who sat at the Woolworths counter who were trying to be served and they were not served because they had too much melanin in their skin. And we're talking about Ethel Blair Jr., we're talking about David Richmond, Franklin McCain, and Joseph McNeil, who sat at the Woolworths counter on February 1st back in 1960. So approximately, 65 years ago, these men were trying to get served food at the Woolworths counter. They were denied food because they were Black individuals, or they had too much melanin in their skin, or they were non-white, or whatever, but they were discriminated against. They took a stand, and that kicked off Black History Month. And as we know, the rest is history when it came to civil rights legislation, when it came to inclusion, which is still very much a big part of our conversations in the United States today when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, with that being said, I wanted to introduce my co-host and my producer and the man behind and in front of the scenes, Derek Kenny, who is here. Happy New Year, my man, and welcome to Black History Month. Happy Black History Month to you.
Happy New Year, Colin, and happy Black History Month to you as well. And I'm happy
Thanks.
and proud to recognize this wonderful month. It's important that we recognize and are proud of our heritage as African Americans.
Definitely. I mean, this is a time when we recognize the contributions that Black Americans, African Americans have made to the country. And of course, the reason for it is because they were not often given that opportunity, or it was ignored. And so Carter G. Woodson had Negro History Week, and then it expanded to Black History Month. And that's what we do all month. Now, a lot of people say, well, you should celebrate Black history every day. And we do, but it's always important and nice to have that extra distinction where we focus on it and remind some of our lighter complected compatriots that Black people, African Americans, however you describe us, were very integral to the development of the nation to put it where it is today. And even though some people would say that it is our status in the world is flagging, we can still say that it has the top economy in the world. It still is very powerful, very robust. Our GDP is high. Black influence, Black American influence over the world has been steady and is increasing. You know what's one thing, Derek, before we get into some of our more serious topics here, one of my students introduced this musical genre to me called Dembow. EMBOW. Now, I'm not sure if you are a big dance hall guy, reggae dance hall guy, but there was an actual song by an artist by the name of Shabba Ranks in the, I would say, almost the height of the reggae dance hall era, and he named it Dembow. And so he actually started a whole new musical genre that younger people are listening to, particularly in the Dominican Republic and in Spanish-speaking countries. So if you think about it, reggae that was popularized here in the US as well because of Black Americans and those across the diaspora is starting even new musical genres. And reggaeton, of course, falls into that category as well, something that was taken from dancehall reggae. We popularized it here as well because we come from across the diaspora, and now we have these new musical genres popping up. And I thought that was fitting to talk about tonight because of our influence, Black history. Of course, the Grammy Awards are on tonight, so of course, music is on the top of everyone's minds. I know that Beyonce won an album. She won for her country music album. I think she won a Grammy for that. So.
Yeah, after all those wins, her first album of the year. She has 30 some other awards, I guess, from the same industry or same industry recognition process. But it's her first album of the year, and it happens to be country music, which of course we contributed to as African Americans. And I didn't want to leave out go-go music, of course, as one of the musics that are popular in
DC,
this region. So yeah, as well as of course.
I don't know if Go-Go won any awards tonight, though.
Go-Go may not have won any awards, but it's won the award in my heart.
It wins an award in your heart. It's always going to be the leading genre in your heart, and as it should be. If you're from the DMV or you listen to music in the DMV, Go-Go should be a part of that experience, right?
Right. Indeed.
I'll never forget the first time I did go to a club here in DC and listen to Go Go in a club for the first time. It was
Oh,
I
wow.
think it was called Republic Gardens back in
Oh
the
yeah,
day,
on
man.
U Street.
You remember
Okay,
Republic
yeah,
Gardens?
yes,
Yeah,
I
New
remember Public
Street. Yeah,
Gardens.
man.
It was a
Yeah,
very nice club, very popular.
venue.
That
Yeah.
that was
I think
back
I
when you
was
stood in line for hours just to get into a club.
just to get into the club. Yep. I think I was in I think I might have been it was part of a journalism conference or something,
Oh,
journalism convention that I was here for,
nice.
and I
All
happened
right.
to go into that club. Anyway, but before we get too
Yes.
derailed
Let's
here,
not
I
get too
wanted to get into
far.
black journalists and black excellence in journalism, and we wanted to talk about April Ryan. I'd love to get her on the show eventually, but she's with Black Press
Clevitt
USA, and this is a
with a K
correspondent,
Yes.
held
White House
a White
correspondent
House press
who
briefing today for the
often
first time.
fielded
The
questions
room was
from
packed.
uh,
The room.
who aimed questions at the president or the White House spokesperson very often. And we know that sometimes the relationship between the now president, President Trump, and the black press, and particularly women in the black press, is very contentious, whether that's April Ryan or Yamiche Alcindor or others. Even when we saw him being interviewed by I can't recall her name off the top of my head now, but in NABJ. I know if you look at our previous podcast, I did say her name without any effort, and now I'm just drawing a blank. But anyway, it's been somewhat contentious. So it's good to see that April Ryan is back in the White House with Black Press USA, because it was speculative whether or not she would return because she was leaving the Grio. So it wasn't was her name Rachel Scott? Maybe her name might have been Rachel Scott. But
Uh,
anyway, the but yeah, we have now we're going to see April Ryan back in the White House. I'm sure she'll be asking a lot of questions on behalf of Black Americans, which I think is very needed. And it'll be interesting to see how she is treated in the White House, right?
yeah, and I think it's interesting since it's probably important that we look back not only at her covering this Trump administration, but she gained notoriety as a African American journalist during the first Trump administration for her interactions with Trump or his interactions with her, so to speak. And it goes back to how he interacts. I'll say interacts with women journalists, and
Yeah,
yeah, it's pretty interesting. And you could say it was a bit of an antagonistic. Is that a word?
yeah,
There's a
he's a
little
bit
back and forth
antagonistic. Yeah,
there. Yeah.
exactly. Antagonistic, oppugnant,
Hmm.
rude, brusque. A lot of characterizations can be made there
Yeah.
with his relationship when it comes to black women asking him questions. I don't know if he has that same kind of attitude for black men, but I'm trying to think of black men who have directly asked him questions. I just can't
Mhm.
think of any off the top of my head when it comes to
Well,
any like argumentative types of responses or rebuttals.
to be fair, I think he's pretty. I think he treats most media professionals that ask questions that he does not quite appreciate the same in the same ilk, the same manner. Yeah, I
Mm.
don't know if he has a certain a certain
Preference.
preference when it comes to who he calls fake news or accuse someone of being with a fake news organization. I think it's based off of whether or not how favorable he finds and respectful you find the questions that you submit. That,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think so too. I think that if you ask him a question that he doesn't like, he does not tend to respond to you favorably, even if it's a good question, even if it's a question that people want to know. It just depends. If you make him look good asking the question, then it's okay. If you make him look bad asking him the question, then it
yeah.
becomes one of the dumbest questions that he's ever heard in his life. So it'll be interesting to see just how he responds to the barrage of questions that are coming his way,
Mhm.
especially as the communications have been different, and that landscape has changed within the White House. You have one of the youngest, I believe, either one of the youngest or the youngest White House spokesperson in history coming in the White House. She's not yet 30. A young white woman there, very Christian. You can tell she wears the cross prominently, the crucifix prominently on her attire there. Yeah, and so, I know that she was carefully selected, maybe for that reason, because she's kind of front facing, right? So, we do know that the president is a lot about image. He is not foreign to being in the media, and of course using it to his advantage, whether it's for a game show, a reality show, or being president in the United States. Let's face it. So, and
Mhm.
we do have media personalities. We have the Department of Defense Secretary Hegseth, Pete Hegseth, who was a former Fox News commentator, who's now our Defense Secretary, taking over for a multiple star general. Now you have a former Fox News commentator who is now the Department of Defense Secretary. So that's
You
going to
know,
be interesting.
let's talk about that though, because that has some bearing on the potential career journey for journalists. So you can now, move from being a media professional to being a defense secretary. But you can also, become media owners or things like that. So what other, is that surprising that you can move or have a movement from being a commentator or media professional
I think,
to,
yeah, I think that's an interesting aspect that you bring up, because I think that some of the conventions that we've had when it comes to government, when it comes to the White House, are now being upended. And maybe that is a positive thing. You're very optimistic in that assessment, Derek, because there are a lot of people who don't feel that way. If you have a multiple star general, 4 or 5, is a 4 star general? Trying to think,
yeah,
Austin,
he has an extensive
Lloyd Austin.
resume. Yeah, 4-star
Yeah, well,
general.
let's, yeah, put that, yeah, he's a
Yeah,
general,
he
multiple star general.
serves. He's led troops directly in the Middle East, and he's managed multiple campaigns throughout the most contentious regions of the world.
Mhm.
He served under a few administrations of, I guess, Obama in leadership positions. So his resume is quite extensive when it comes to military and defense related career activities. So it's a stark
Stark
juxtaposition,
contrast between
contrast
resumes.
there, right? Yeah,
Hegseth
yeah,
does have some
very
military
different.
background, but it
Hmm.
pales in comparison to Lloyd
Yeah. So
Austin's,
was he a
former
platoon leader
Secretary
for
Austin's
a
resume.
National Guard or something? Is that what his experience
I
was?
can't remember what I just know it's, and by comparison, it's kind of shallow. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think he served longer at Fox than he did in the military, if I'm not mistaken. I don't want to put
Yeah.
mistruths out there. So anyone who's watching, do your research, see
Yes.
how the resumes compare. But I
Certainly.
do know that if you were look side by side comparison of resumes, Hegseth's resume would be much shallower than Lloyd Austin's. And so when we think about information coming from the Department of Defense and how that relates to journalism and communications, one has to wonder how much information we're going to get and if it's going to be accurate, right?
Hmm.
Does the present secretary understand all the nuances that are coming out of the Defense Department, and who is going to be sharing and disseminating that information? So I think as journalists, we have to pay attention, because there are a lot of foreign policy issues that we have to deal with. And our national defense is also something that we have to contend with, and has been a big deal. So a lot of those issues are things that journalists will ultimately have to be gatekeepers of when it comes to sharing this information and knowing the depths of the information that they should be sharing with us, right?
Right. Yeah. Certainly.
Now,
Certainly. Now, before you jump on that,
yeah,
let's can you go back? I think you have a bit of experience and knowledge when it comes to the White House correspondence room and being able to get qualified for being in the White House correspondence room. What are some of the requirements that you found in the past that April may have had to meet to be able to be a reporter covering the
yeah.
White House from that very prestigious location?
Yeah, I wanted to get into that. And the preface for this is that there are new requirements, loosened requirements to cover the White House, and being in the press Brady briefing room, where you could be a content creator essentially to cover the White House now. You could be a blogger, you could be a content creator. You basically just need, I guess, a platform, but a nice phone, or maybe just a nice platform with your own domain and email address, and you might be able to cover the White House as any other member of legacy media might have been able to. But when I did it, I definitely went through years of schooling to be a journalist. Worked at different news stations to build up my resume. Then I had to apply with Congress to be a White House. Well, first I had to go through Congress and be credentialed in Congress, and then I had to get credentialed with background checks and all of that with the White House. So it was, if you think about it, for me, it was like almost like a multi-year process.
Wow.
And I had to work at several different news places. April Ryan, the same thing. I mean, she's an established journalist who's been in Washington for many years and has worked at many different news platforms and news sources. And she's been covering the White House for a while too. And now she's able to still stay and cover the White House, but she's been established for a while. But she's been cutting her teeth in Washington for many years, asking the tough questions. And she will be bumping elbows with people who blog for a living, I guess, right? So that'll be different in itself. And of course, there are positives and negatives to that too, where I guess if you want access to cover the White House, you don't have to jump through a lot of hoops and jump over a lot of hurdles to do it. At the same time, though, what is the quality of news and the quality of questioning and quality of information that you're getting if you don't have people who followed any protocol or went through any proper education or really understands the depths and nuances of journalism and how things should be reported in the best interests of the public?
Well, let's talk about that. So, April Ryan is will be in the room, and she's part of Black Press USA, which is the news arm of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, an association that represents well over 100 African American media organizations or print publications.
Mhm.
So well established, been around for many, many years. But the opportunity, I believe, I guess now for content creators, which means anyone that have started their own media business, which I guess as a content creator you have, can now have access to the White House if you meet the requirements that were stated as long as you're creating news content of the day and are legitimate, independent journalists, you're welcome to cover the White House. She cited a Gallup poll showing low trust in the media in the United States, particularly among young people. Levitt, who we mentioned earlier, the press secretary for the White House, said credentials will be given to those who meet the White House's criteria and pass the Secret Service background check. So it seems that the criteria has become a bit looser. So now independent journalists, podcasters, social media influencers, and content creators can apply for credentials to cover the White House. But it doesn't say, how likely is it that those content creators, independent creators, can get access. But if you are a self-employed media professional, does this give you a bit of optimism to be able to share your voice and generate revenue because now you have access to areas that before were only for major media organizations and fully employed journalists?
Yeah, I think it does. I think if you're a person that wants to make a living covering the White House, I do think that this provides an opportunity for you for sure. Again, from what they've listed as their credentials, if it's just that, that seems like a pretty low barrier to entry there. But of course, I do think there are probably different nuances that they may not be listing. What kind of angle you might have in covering the news, what kind of news platform you represent. I think those things will also be factored in. I don't think it'll be like anyone with a decent platform or bunch of followers will be able to cover the White House. I do think it depends on where your sensibilities lie, so to speak, with the news that you cover or how you cover it. But it does, again, offer new opportunities for people. You don't have to, like I said, go through all of these different hurdles in order to be a journalist to cover the White House. So, yeah, maybe this will be good for people who are up and coming. They'll decide they don't need to go to journalism school anymore if they can just set up a camera and get a domain page and just start covering the White House. So that could be interesting as well. We'll have to see where this goes, DK. I do
Yeah.
think that
Mhm.
it'll be interesting to see how news will be covered with a more, some might even say, democratized standard. Because
Yeah.
now it's open to so many more people as opposed to gatekeepers who said, well, this person should be allowed and this person doesn't. When I was covering the White House, there is a hierarchy. For example, a lot of
Certainly.
legacy media sat in front and they were almost
Hmm.
assigned seats. So you had AP in the front, you had CNN in the front, You had ABC, CBS, NBC in the front. If you were somebody lesser known, well, then you might be in the back, or you might not even be allowed in the briefing room, depending on
Yeah.
how much room was in there. When
And
I
the room
started,
is
it
pretty
was during
small though, right?
Bush
Is it?
Obama transition. There were a
Mhm.
lot of people in there. So if you weren't part of that well-known lead media outlet,
Mm.
you might not have had space. You definitely didn't have sitting space. You would have had to stand in the aisle in the periphery of the room because it isn't a big room either. It's a pretty small room.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So the notion of allowing more people, or at least loosening the criteria, could make things a bit more chaotic, or I guess crowded in the room. It'll be interesting to see. I'm looking forward to seeing what the press conferences might be when these non-traditional media professionals ask questions, and how will they formulate the questions, and what types of questions they'll ask, and how they introduce their organizations. This is going
Yeah.
to be we're entering a new era, a new era of professionals, media professionals, and hopefully, and not all of them are, I don't think all of them will be grassroots people. Maybe there will be some traditional journalists that
Oh, they're
have their own
definitely will.
platforms. Like I would imagine someone like Roland Martin, who has his own media organization, that is a world class journalist, and would maybe get access. I'm not sure if Trump, his staff, will necessarily welcome him, but I believe if he applied, then why not? Why
But I
wouldn't
would
he be
I
able
would
to?
argue that his show is grassroots too, though. It's
Yeah,
just been
it is. Yeah.
established for a few years now, but
Hmm.
we have to remember when it started, it was a
Yeah.
fledgling
Right.
operation like anything starting out. And then
Yeah.
he builds his audience and he's very consistent and he says has talking points that are thought provocative.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
over time, now he might seem established and may seem almost mainstream, but
Correct.
that's not how he started out. If you
Yeah.
remember, he was ousted from CNN. He was looking for work. He was trying to gain access, and then he said, "Okay, I'm going to do this on my own."
Yeah.
And that's indicative of somebody who is very determined, somebody who has a vision and dream, and decided
Yeah.
to go for it. So I think that he's definitely one of those people who can say that. And now, yeah, he probably, I mean, based on what he's built, he should be able to get access. But like I
Hmm.
said before, because of his stance, right? He is
Hmm.
very critical of the Trump administration and Trump himself. Would he gain the same kind of access as somebody who might have formerly worked at OAN and decided to set up their own blog, for example? That person from OAN might be given a preference over Roland Martin. You know what I mean? So there's that. We'll see. Like I said, now you said it's the beginning of a new era. We will have to see if it is the beginning of a new era or the beginning of a new error. Okay, so we'll have to see which one it is. You know,
Applause.
uh, there is I'm suspending judgment on that. Oh man, well, thank you for that. I don't know if it deserved any applause, applause, but I would rather applause than booing. Let's put it that way, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll see what happens with that, and
Yeah.
I'm kind of looking forward to seeing how that works because maybe it could, if it does go the right way, could open up more opportunities to promote black journalism as well, or what they call the new black media. New black media has always been something kind of, again, very organic, definitely not prominent, definitely more behind the scenes, talking about stories that were not salient in the zeitgeist. But perhaps because of this new policy, that may change, and that would be a positive development, right?
Mm.
But
Certainly.
if past is prologue, based on past behaviors, that might be a bit dubious. So we have to suspend judgment for now and see what direction this new policy takes in regard to content creators and those who are not considered part of legacy media.
Wow. Interesting era for communications professionals, but
Yeah.
also I guess an encouraging thing for solo professionals, the professionals that are building their own brands in similar fashion to, we mentioned Roland Martin earlier, but maybe there's others that are transitioning from maybe a career with a traditional media organization, but still wants to further their journalism career or communications career. They can start their own blog or build their own online magazine or whatever, and become uh, a strong source of information for people in a similar fashion to what they did before, running their own independent media business. That's and you mentioned it earlier. Like the barriers to entry aren't the same that they were before. You don't need to have access to a printing press or tons and tons of wood pulp to print out a paper. All you need is a website, a WordPress account, URL, and then the time to spend the time and the know-how to produce good content and get it out there and build an audience. So it's an interesting time that we're in. It's an interesting time, and I believe that this president will help encourage people to really want to be wary of what's happening in the news and increase the importance of news professionals that know what they're talking about and know how to get information and know how to vet information and ensure that we get good, honest, true information, and that's the key, and I hope we're not in a information desert in America. And I hope we're not in a truth desert where we are lacking integrity in communications because of key factors that are governing the country. So
Yeah. Now, they didn't say how many people they were limiting this coverage to, did they? There's not anything that says we're only going to offer these special credentials because there are different tiers of credentials as well. At least traditionally there have been where you could get a credential just for the day and you would have to renew your credential every time you went in, or you could get a hard pass. Hard pass is where you get a credential that expires, I think, after a year or something like that. Then you have to renew it. But you essentially can go into the briefing room almost whenever you want. I guess obviously there might be restrictions some days and things like that. But essentially, it's a pass that allowed you access the press room whenever there was a news conference, or if you just had to do work in there. Right? You were given a card. You stop at the checkpoint, which is right there on the other side of Lafayette Square, and then you tap in and you were able to go in. Now, this is years ago for me, so I'm sure it's changed. I'm sure there's some AI scanning stuff, whatever, but it was almost like going into the airport. You know, when you go through TSA screening in the airport where you have to take out all the metal objects out of your coat and your jacket and your purse or whatever. I didn't have a purse, obviously, but ladies had to take stuff out of their purse. They had to scan it through, and then you tap in, and they would allow you into the briefing room. I wonder if they changed those restrictions, and if the bloggers, content creators, have to go through a different screening process, or will they have a hard pass where they will have access for a year or longer, right? And they don't always have to tap in. Well, I saw a number there. How many did it say at the top there? Okay, so
7,400 influencers have
7,400.
applied for White House press credentials.
Yeah, 7,000.
7,400. And how many people can fit in the room? I guess it was like
I mean,
dozens, a
that
few
room,
dozen.
I don't know the exact capacity, but I would say like 50 or something.
Wow.
And that's
Okay.
packed. 50 is packed. Comfortable, maybe 30.
Oh
You know what I
gosh,
mean? So, yeah.
that's
Uh,
amazing.
Yeah,
It,
so
it's
it's going to be interesting. I mean, there are going to
it's
be some legitimate journalists that I think that are going to be left out just because the White House will be inundated, and I think there'll be some, in my opinion, there might be some partiality there too. So we'll see what happens. And that's not to say that there wasn't partiality in the Biden administration or the Obama administration. I just think that there is likely going to be partiality in this administration as well. So when you have more than 7,000 applicants,
right.
there has to be criteria other than you've got a nice blog space, you have more than a
Hmm.
thousand followers, a decent camera, and you pass a background check. I think there's
Right.
probably going to
Yeah.
be some more in the
Certainly.
judging aspect of who's going to be allowed in the White House or not. So.
Now what does this mean for journalists or working communicators? Does this emphasize the importance of having a social media presence, even if you're a working journalist in traditional media? And how important, I guess, in light of the White House mentioning TikTok several times in this article in Fortune magazine, is it important to embrace TikTok even though it's under scrutiny and the potential or the future is a little hazy?
Well, that's another thing too. If you're about right now, we're in an era of personal branding as well, and the
Mhm.
bigger your brand is, the more followers you have. Look at some of the biggest podcasters. That's why they got the the space and the adulation and the attention that they got because they had a lot of followers and they were very popular and proliferate in
Yep.
social media, like Joe Rogan or something like that, right? I don't know if he does TikTok specifically, but because he was so big in social media, he got a lot of followers and he became very prominent. And I don't think it would hurt if you had lots of followers on different platforms, whether that's Instagram, whether that's, uh, you know, TikTok, whether that's YouTube or whatever. So I think that it would really depend. So, but we will have to see. But with that, I think that we will catch you next time on the next Capital Press Club Legacy podcast. I want to thank everyone for watching as we enter the new year. We'll have fresh topics to talk to you about as we watch developments in Washington and how that corresponds to Black media. I want to thank Derek for joining me tonight, and we'll have him on next time, and we'll have some guests lined up for you in upcoming episodes. And again, we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us. Take care.